Thank you for coming. Now we turn to the role of the internet on the campaigns themselves. And as we'll hear from our panel, this is the year when we are seeing the internet reshape the process of running for president. Down one track, it is extending the reach of the actual campaigns, making it easier for them to raise money, identify supporters, mobilize volunteers, and directly contact voters. In short, to conduct all of the organizational activities that candidates have conducted pretty much since time immemorial. But at the same time, the internet is also making it easier for voters to organize themselves and pursue more independent activity for their candidates outside of the direct control of the campaigns. Largely because of the rising impact of the internet, the scale and scope of this year's presidential campaign, especially the historic primary contest between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, has been unprecedented. The candidates have hit new heights on really every front, from raising money to hiring staff and buying ads, to recruiting volunteers and undertaking grassroots phone banking and door knocking. All of this input has resulted in a dramatic output, a record turnout of more than 35 million people voting in the Democratic primaries, and all of this might be just the warm-up for a general election in which the ability to inspire large numbers of people to work on your behalf, to donate, to knock on doors, or just to talk to their friends, could play a larger role in the outcome than ever before. To explore these dynamics, we have a great panel here. You could say pulled right from the trenches. I'm Ron Brownstein, political director for Atlantic Media. To my right, I have Mark Sohoo, the deputy e-campaign director for John McCain. Mindy Finn, who served as director of e-campaign strategy for Mitt Romney, or e-strategy for Mitt Romney. Peter Daou, who handled the internet and online activities for Hillary Clinton, and Joe Rospars, who designed Barack Obama's online strategies as director of new media for the campaign. Joe Trippy, who pioneered in many ways, it was important in breakthroughs in the use of the internet for Howard Dean in 2004, was supposed to be with us. He was called away on business, but he has sent not only his regrets, but also a short statement that, as you might expect, with a few thoughts. And what I'd like to do is read Joe's few comments to sort of give kind of an overview sense as we start, then turn to our panelists who will each talk for about 5 minutes, 5 or 6 minutes, and I will ask a question or two, and then we will turn it over to you. But first, let me start with a few thoughts in absentia from Joe Trippy. And he says, Ron and all, I am really sorry that events made it impossible for me to be there today. Times have changed in the brief 4 years since the Dean campaign. We had about 1.4 million blogs in 2004. Today, there are over 77 million. In the Dean campaign, we built Dean TV, a 24/7 video wonderland where people could post their own videos of Dean's speeches and music, or just plain video of why they were with the campaign. We were doing YouTube before YouTube was doing YouTube. Facebook didn't exist. But this cycle, one person started a million-strong for Barack Facebook page, and hundreds of thousands joined in a matter of weeks, without the campaign having anything to do with it. It's the network, stupid. And the network has grown bigger and the tools so much more powerful than they were just 4 years ago. It feels like we in the Dean campaign were like the Wright brothers, proving that you could use the network and the tools to build a new kind of political organizing. It was a fragile contraption, but we proved you could fly. What has happened in 4 short years is the network has grown. Million more have broadband connections. Millions more have joined the conversation, and the tools they have to change things or take action have gotten much more powerful. We may all still be pioneers, but the campaigns of 2008 are no longer at Kitty Hawk. Now we see the Apollo project of a new kind of politics. I make 2 predictions, Joe Trippy says. Barack Obama will raise at least $500 million in the general election. And whoever is the next president will stand at his inaugural at the end of the television presidency that began with John F. Kennedy and the beginning of the networked or interactive presidency, where millions of Americans will sign on to his agenda online and build a community of Americans to pass that agenda through the Congress. The president's power, in conjunction with the will of the people, will change the power center in Washington like at no other time in our history. All this in just 4 years. As much as I saw it coming, even I find it amazing. So suitably sweeping and big thoughts with which to frame our discussion of how online politics is changing politics in 2008. And to start the conversation, I'm going to turn to Mark.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks to everybody for being here. I think the two things that really stand out to me so far of what we've seen in this election cycle is one, how the scope of everything that's out there in terms of, as Joe's statement just said, the number of social networks out there, and just the number of tools that are available to us now, Facebook, MySpace, YouTube, and all the things that we can do with Google. One of the lessons the McCain campaign learned as we were running low on money last summer and all was the power of online advertising and how much we could do with targeted advertising with the folks at Google and things like that. So that to us was really an important piece of our strategy, is that you don't always have to be the biggest and the baddest. You don't have to have the most money. And I think that's what the internet is proving today, is that you don't have to be the established candidate, the one with the most money. The internet offers a lot of opportunities to be smart and efficient with how you spend money and how you spend time, and allowing your supporters to do things for themselves, as the statement just alluded to. So I think that plus the openness and transparency, and I think that's why this whole online, or the whole town hall thing with John McCain and Barack Obama is kind of picking up some steam, because I think there is a hunger out there for this transparency that is, I think, pretty evident in the world today, is that people expect, political candidates from president down to dog catcher expect the camera is always on, the mic is always on, everything you say will be put on YouTube and twisted and contorted, and some ways good and some ways bad, and everything is going to be out there. And I think that the candidates nowadays have this expectation that it's very transparent and you are who you are. So I think that's one of the two things that have really transformed what we do as professionals in this, is greater transparency and changing a little bit the tactics of advertising and organization.
I'm going to jump, maybe Peter talk next. Peter Daou handled internet strategy for Hillary Clinton.
I want to keep it really brief. Having done a lot of panels with a lot of people up here, what I'd like to give is a little bit of insight in terms of, look, we all know the internet's changed everything. We all know, some of the basics at this point. We've known this for a long time. There are bloggers threaten journalists. I mean, these are sort of the givens. What's the next step to really understand what's going on with this medium that's changing politics? I mean, there are three basic functions of the internet, and that's fundraising, it's organizing, and it's communicating. And no matter what we do up here, we're all working in those three basic buckets. And in each one of those, it is transforming politics. I want to talk very briefly about the communication side of it. The fundraising is pretty apparent what happened. Obviously, this can't, it's the easiest metric because you see the money, you see the dollars, and there's no doubt that this is something that has never existed before, and it'll continue going this way. Organizing as well with social networks, which when I did this for Kerry in 2004, again, none of the tools existed, but right now with organizing, it's becoming quite clear, and tip of the hat to Joe and his team, who did a phenomenal job using these tools in ways that, at the start of the campaign, we didn't know how they would work. Nobody knew if Facebook and MySpace and our own site-based social networks would make a huge difference, and they clearly have. But in terms of the communication side of it, I was listening to the previous panel, and I guess we're all here listening to it. The dynamic between media, blogs, online commenters is what it has made it infinitely more complex, the way the national debate and conversation happens. It's not a matter of bloggers are more angry or journalists are more responsible or bloggers are so fluffy and YouTube is so happy. It's that the way information is moving from node to node now has made it, the entire national debate, much more recursive, which means, it refers to itself more, and in so doing creates this very strange loop and loops back on itself, and everybody's part of that loop. And it's because the information is now obviously more durable. It's there throughout time for everybody to see, where it wasn't in the past. So where the media could really set the agenda 20 and 30 years ago, the agenda setting function of the media has now changed. And so what the internet has done is created this infinitely complex conversation that occurs globally 24/7. And so to understand that is to win campaigns, is to really see where that information is moving, how quickly it's moving, in what form it's moving, how it's being perceived, and how to work within that flow. You know, a lot of these panels are notorious for coining new terms, at least on the technology side. So I'm going to coin one right now. I call that the chatter stream, which is this endless river of conversation with all these swirls and ripples and different directions that it's going in. Controlling that chatter stream is winning the election. So I'll stop there.
It's interesting, you know, I have felt as an observer of the campaign that in many ways controversy is now a demand side driven function. The amount of outlets dedicated to covering the campaign exceeds the amount of conflict that the campaign can generate on its own. It's sort of like a celebrity gossip now. I mean, there just aren't enough celebrities to fill all the channels we have to describe them. To some extent, the same thing is happening in campaigns. There is so much of so many chatter streams. Mm-hmm. That are dedicated to it. And by definition, every day something has to be the most controversial and and sharpest conflict between the candidates. And whatever that is, it will be elevated through those networks. And then we turn to Mindy for some thoughts.
Sure. You know, as I was preparing to come here today, I thought about the title of this forum, which is the first 21st century campaign, and I kind of got a little chuckle out of it because I was thinking, you know, I understand where that title came from, but this really isn't the first 21st century campaign. I mean, we're almost a decade into the 21st century now, and we're calling this the first 21st century campaign. And what is the reason for that? I mean, I think the reason for that is that new media is no longer new. It's gone mainstream. That the people that are in charge of the online aspects of the campaign are no longer getting confused for the IT people, or the people that fix the computers or fix your telephone. And the people who do the online part of a campaign, the online strategists, are no longer stuck in the basement or in a set of cubes as far away from everybody else as possible because people don't think that they need to talk to them. And the reason to me I think it doesn't seem so new is I was on the Bush-Cheney 04 e-campaign. I know Peter was on the Kerry campaign, and we've had these conversations before where the way we were treated in 2004 is very different than we were treated in 2007 and 2008 as far as what role we played in the campaign. But even coming into 2007, there was still a gap, I think, in the understanding by most people who are in politics about the role of, I don't know Peter's experience, but that was my experience. Everybody knew that the web was important and that the internet was going to play a big role in the campaign just based on the number of voters who were spending their time on the internet. I mean, all anyone had to do was look at the statistics and know where people are getting their information. Results from 2004, based on the Pew study, it showed 61% of voters got information from the internet, and every year it was growing exponentially. So campaigns, wasn't rocket science to say we're going to put a lot of time on the internet. But what I think the campaigns that were smart and that have really gotten the most effect on the web is understanding that it's not just technology, and it's not just tools, and it's not just tactics. It's a culture that has fundamentally changed, that is looking for something different. There's a reason that Time Magazine had their Person of the Year, I think it was last year, I get confused on the years, when it said Time's Person of the Year is you, and had a computer. It's you because each of us has more information and more of a role in politics and in what we buy and researching what we buy and researching where our children go to school and researching where we want to live. I mean, there's just hordes of information online, more than we could possibly digest on any topic that we want to find. We go to Google and we search and we find it. And there's a reason that Google has become, is in the dictionary as a term, as a verb that people use. They Google something. It shows up in movies. It's because all of us are doing it. And so again, that's not technology and that's not tactics. The technology powered it, but it's really a culture that has fundamentally changed. And the way that I think the candidates are responding, what I'm really fascinated by, is obviously the tools, the social networking tools they've used, and the fundraising gimmicks, and the Facebook groups, and MySpace, and the unique emails that they do that look personal, but it's also the way that they're acting. People are expecting more depth and breadth from their candidates in a shorter period of time. And they're expecting a more personal connection, and they're expecting authenticity. And I think if we look even at the candidates that were extremely successful in this election, who we have as our nominees now, Barack Obama and John McCain, a large part of the reason they're successful over some of the other candidates who were good candidates is because people saw them as authentic. People could summarize who they were in a short soundbite. True, as we talked about in the last panel, maybe there's a danger to that. They're not looking at the depth. But but they knew who that person was, and they felt that everything that that person does epitomized who that person was. With Barack Obama, it was hope and change. With McCain, it was war hero, patriot. You know, those are very short. I don't know if that was the message you tried to get out, but I think that's the message that people grasp. And that's because their message online was consistent with their message offline in everything that they did. And the reason I talk about that is that, you know, now as a strategist for candidates, you often have, you know, every campaign now and every organization does get it. It has gone mainstream. That's why 2008 is the 21st Century Campaign. They've gotten it to the point where they say, oh my goodness, look what Barack Obama did. He raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and you know, a lot of it through the web. And how do we do that? How can we raise that kind of money? How can we use the internet? And what they're not understanding is it's not just about how they use the internet. It's about how the internet is using them. And by that I mean the people that are on their internet, which is us, which is the American people. And so there's two aspects, and I'm going to finish off with this. I think when we talk about how campaigns are using the internet, we have to talk about how the internet's using campaigns. And the web, in a way, I think is extremely powerful on both fronts. The way that the internet, meaning the people are using campaigns, they are doing so much more than the campaigns are doing. In some ways, making the campaigns even less important, and even the candidates' activities less important. The power of what's going on online by individuals, you know, we look at the videos that are showing up on YouTube created by individuals have infinitely more hits than any video that was prepackaged and put out by a campaign right now. And the group, you know, A Million Strong for Obama was created by an individual and not by the campaign. You know, you see the campaigns responding by, you know, for example, on the Romney campaign, we got a lot of attention for doing a create your own ad contest, which was opening up to the public to say, create your own ad, upload it, and the one that gets the number of votes we'll put on our site, people will vote, and we'll actually run it on television. So those are the user-generated piece. But then there's also the piece, and this is less sexy, but it is important. It is how campaigns can use the internet. Because there's so much information out there and we're so accessible, we're putting so much of our personality out there on Facebook and on our blog, and our face is open to millions of people. Campaigns have this ability to target information to the specific person based on their interest in a way that they couldn't before. And that's really the behind the scenes part. We'll probably talk about that less today, but I think we need to think of these in two different sides. There's really the grassroots side, which I think is the democratization of politics through the internet, and then there's the side where the information that's available now on the internet and the technology that allows us on the go to get out the vote messages to supporters on their cell phones is the piece where campaigns are really using the internet to reach down to the individual level to communicate to people about the issues that they care about.
Thank you. Joe?
I think the thing that I can say to most capture what we've been doing online is that it's an amazing time and an amazing environment, an amazing moment in history to be working for a candidate who is a community organizer and who got his start in public service, bringing ordinary people together to cement relationships with each other around the premise that they have the ability to come together and achieve change. And Peter briefly went through the three pieces of the work that we do in the new media shop in any of these given campaigns, and it's he's right, it's the field and organizing side, the fundraising side, and the communications and telling the story and content side. And through all of those things, I think what we've been trying to do from the very beginning is to put together a program that is centered around the relationships that run through all of those aspects of our work. So, for example, on the organizing side, we've built a community of nearly 1 million people now who have accounts and are participants in the my.barackobama.com network. And while that participation helps us build a deeper relationship with them, as in between the supporter and the campaign, it's been even more important in that it's helped create relationships among our supporters in tens of thousands of communities across the country. And that relationship is something that's been the foundation of our field program, both in the early states where there were a lot of staff and there was a lot of competition and teams were built there, but also while all that was going on, building the base of support in the February 5th states and beyond through February, March, and April. I remember in the first 24 hours after we launched the website, one of the first groups that popped up was Idaho for Obama, which not a lot of folks were thinking about that first day, but which ultimately was an important caucus state for us on February 5th. And those, when we finally did put staff into these states, and it was all 50 states, the folks who were hitting the ground as staff to build the field operation and get ready to get out the vote, they leveraged these networks of existing folks who had these relationships that were built up over the course of the whole year before our campaign staffed up and brought people into these big states. The other piece of fundraising, the relationships run through that as well. Whether it's through email or on the web, the fundraising piece is an opportunity not just to raise the money and the resources you need to run the campaign, but also to build relationships between supporters and to have supporters reach out to their friends to increase the number of donors to the campaign. We have more than 1.5 million folks who have made a donation to Obama for America, and that's largely through outreach of individuals getting their friends involved, asking them to give $5, and tracking that on their own personal fundraising page on my.barackobama.com. Another piece is the grassroots match program that we've done. A big part of our online fundraising has been asking folks who've previously given to the campaign to promise to make a second or third donation on the premise that we'll use their promise to match a donation of someone who's giving for the first time. And so the opportunity to be responsible for bringing someone into the campaign, having them make their first $5 or $10 or $25 contribution is something that motivates a lot of people to give. And the system we build allows for folks to actually connect with each other. So whether you're promising to match someone's first gift or you're making your first gift, you actually see the person, you see the name and town of the person who you're being matched with, and you can exchange a message with them about why you're giving and why you're involved in the campaign. You can also even check a box and share your email address so that you can continue the conversation. So through our fundraising, which has been obviously successful by the traditional measures, we've also started hundreds of thousands of conversations among our supporters about why they're involved and allowed them to see a window into why other people are involved. Similarly with the communications and message stuff, I think there's, campaigns as content producers is an under commented upon phenomenon. And, in the first panel we saw a lot about how the campaign participates in the traditional media cycle, but there's also this responsibility to communicate with your supporters and to tell the story of the campaign. And so what we've tried to do is create content that is, beyond that traditional day-to-day, back and forth in the press or with our opponents, but to really document what's happening and show back to our supporters the movement that they're creating. So in our YouTube channel, we have over 1,000 videos, and many of them are documentaries about our supporters. One example would be organizing around a Walk for Change canvas that we did nationwide last year in June. We announced earlier this week that we're going to be putting staff into all 50 states for the general election, but we've been a 50-state campaign from the very beginning, and one of the important moments last year was to create a video. We sent cameras out and had volunteers who are video producers and have their own equipment actually attend some of the more than 1,000 canvases that happened in neighborhoods across the country, and put that together into video that we could then show back to our supporters, so that what we're communicating to them was a story of a campaign that they're a participant in. And I think that's an important piece that a lot of folks tend to miss on the communications and content side. The other thing with the relationships is that they're constantly evolving, and this is the final thing. And I would point everyone to, and I don't want to embarrass him because I think he's here somewhere, but Jose Vargas wrote an interesting piece in the Washington Post this week that followed a woman who went from being a self-admitted not involved person in politics through the track of her relationship with the campaign and with other supporters in her area, from a $10 donation and participation on one of the social networks that the campaign has a profile on, all the way through to becoming an actual delegate to the national convention from California. And so, what we're seeing over the course of the campaign is not just that we're flipping the binary switch with folks from being a supporter to a volunteer or whatever, but actually building something more complex in terms of relationships, both with the campaign and the candidate and the supporters, but also among them themselves. That's something that's evolving and grows more powerful every day, and it's something that's going to last beyond the campaign. And I think that's important, both for our party as we're building that and going into the next election cycles. But I think it's also important for democracy, because these are people who are participating in the civic process in many cases for the first time. And I think the institutions, up and down the ballot, and races up and down the ballot, and elections, not just presidential, are going to benefit from that.
Thanks. Let me ask a couple questions, and then before we turn it over to the audience, and I want to go back to Peter's useful kind of dividing of the activity into three categories: fundraising, organizing, and communicating. I'm interested in your sense of sort of where we are in the wave or the cycle on these. Let me start with organizing. After the 2004 campaign, Karl Rove famously and repeatedly said that he thought one of the key reasons they won was that by October of 2004, they had 1.4 million people working on their behalf. After a year and a half of organizing, they had 1.4 million people who did something every day to try to elect George W. Bush. Call a friend, knock on a door, stuff an envelope. When you look at the number of people that have been brought into this campaign so far, do you think we will see numbers by the fall of 2008 that will exceed that? I mean, is 1.4 million people working every day on behalf of Barack Obama in October something you think would be considered a high number or a low number? I mean, how large is this going to get? And same thing for John McCain.
Well, I think the definition of doing something is important because we view the fundraising piece as one component of the organizing effort that we have with folks, whether we're asking them to make phone calls, knock on doors, make a $5 donation, or talk to their friends. So by that measure, we already have more people than that who've done something, and because we have 1.5 million donors, 93% of whom have given $200 or less or something. But we also have, folks out there creating events and knocking on doors and making phone calls. So I think it's not just about how many people you can get to do one thing, but also how many things each of those people are doing, because you can multiply there as well. So,
well, how far do you think you are? How deep are you into your universe? If you said about 1 million people who have My Barack Obama accounts, and 1.5 million people have donated. There's some overlap in there. Do you feel like you're pretty deep into the pool, or this could get a lot bigger by Election Day?
I think it's going to have to get a lot bigger by Election Day, but I also think that all of those people are motivated to help make that happen, and it's from that base that it's going to get bigger, that those folks reach out and bring new people into the network every single day.
I think this is one of the areas, too, where you see an interesting cross between online and offline. And, a lot of what Joe was just talking about is offline conversations. And, one of the keys, I think, of some of the things that all of us said was, the conversation that's happening out there. And so it's not just that, you're reading a blog and posting comments and dealing with this insular world, but you're out there, you're talking to your friends, you're organizing parties, you're knocking on doors. There's the breadth of what you can do is not just knock on doors, make phone calls, is now, limitless into the number of ways that you can do something, down to being empowered to create your own video and, or do any number of different things that simply weren't possible for people last cycle.
Yeah, can I come on that real quick? First of all, I absolutely agree with Peter's breakdown of the three activities. I often, just because to put it in kindergarten terms, define it as message, money, and mobilization, which is all part of the larger movement, so that it's all with M, so people can't forget what it is. But it's the same things. And it all goes to, though, I think, the power of the web, and something that was there in 2004, but is certainly more apparent in 2008. It's turbocharged, and people are understanding it better, which is that we're now, our grassroots and even our campaign staff and our activities that we do as a campaign are no longer siloed into just communications, just political, and just fundraising or message, money, and mobilization. It's that with the web, all those activities are going on simultaneously, and the grassroots and individuals are interacting with the campaign in all the ways. And so you used to, for anyone that's worked on campaigns or, and even other political organizations, they talk about, well, here's our donors, and here's our volunteers, and then we might have these people who help, write letters to the editor. Well, now each of us as individuals can be doing a series of those activities very quickly with the click of a mouse from our computer. And so it's really a cycle, and someone can come into the cycle at any point. They may get a message via email or something they watch on television from one of the candidates, which inspires them to give a contribution. And then once they're a donor, they get looked into the organization and decide they're going to go on the ground and volunteer. Someone may show up to volunteer and be so inspired that they're going to give $50, and then they're also going to be someone who writes a letter to the editor. And because of the web, it's so much more feasible for us as individuals to take part in all pieces of that. But it's for that reason I think that campaigns and political organizations have had a very hard time, and to some extent the media, really getting their hands wrapped around on where does this internet stuff go? Because it's not just communications, and it's not just fundraising, and it's not just political, it's all of them. And how do we integrate it into those pieces of a campaign? And how important is it? Because if our communication shop is still our premier communications vehicle, but then our internet, our web people are actually a lot of days communicating with more people at a time than, say, a story that gets placed in a newspaper. I don't have the answer to that, but that's the challenge I think campaigns and even the media are having, is that the internet is all pieces of a campaign in a turbocharged speed.
Does the side with the larger network in this environment have an advantage, a tangible advantage, and what does that translate into, if in fact it is?
I'll sort of answer that question, but I want to go off of a point that Joe made, which I think is very important for this election. The answer to your question is, what the metrics are very difficult. I mean, no one should take away anything from on-the-ground field organizing. There are people who have been doing this for years and years and do it very well, and that, person-to-person contact is critical. But also, person-to-person networking online makes a difference too, and having good online organizing, again, has been proven this cycle to be, number one, doable through social networks, because that was even an open question a year and a half ago. And so the answer is yes, but how to measure it, I don't know. But the more important point is how many voters were brought out by both our candidates and others as well this cycle, but especially on the Democratic side. And to the point you're asking, Ron, about what's going to happen in the general, I think one marker of what may come, or one sort of one sort of metric that portends well for the Obama campaign going forward, is that our biggest challenge, or one of our biggest challenges online, was that Hillary's core constituency, in many ways, which became very apparent towards the end of the campaign, was not necessarily your typical internet users. And one of our biggest, if you look at older voters, lower income voters, people who are not typically what you consider the net roots or the online activist community or politically active online, one of our biggest challenges was to find them and bring them to online politics. They may be doing something else on the internet, and that was constantly sort of one of the main objectives of the internet team at the Clinton campaign was bring those people to the web. And it was a year-long effort, all of 2007, to sort of build that community of people who may never have done politics on the internet before. And when the floodgates opened after the senator, sorry, I toggle between calling her senator and Hillary, but after she announced the loan, and suddenly there was this huge influx of money, was so many people who had never donated or used a credit card online were writing letters. 95-year-old woman, I have never used a credit card to donate online. I've never been on the internet to blog. I've never done politics. I've never talked to other people and been part of groups on the internet. So the fact that so many new voters were brought into this cycle, and so many of them were using the internet for the first time, I think is a very good omen for Democrats, and of course I'm a dedicated Democrat, for the general election. So not only are the people who have done this with the Obama campaign will continue to do it, but I think they're going to bring a lot more people into the process too who've never done it before.
Mark, when you look at the amount of money that Obama and Clinton combined raised with small donors through the internet, obviously significantly larger than the Republicans, the amount of turnout in these primaries was enormous, 36 million people voting. When you look at what they have been able to build through the spring in the internet, are you confident you can match what they do in the general election? Do you have to match what they do in terms of building your own network of donors and volunteers? And how do you assess where Republicans stand in terms of that online community now versus where Democrats are heading into the general election?
Sure, I think that's one of the one of the things that the media likes to write about is just how the breadth and depth of the Democratic primary, and certainly both campaigns have done a very good job of organizing online. But I think there is a strong online community for the Republican side that as you're mentioning, a Barack person, a Hillary person, a McCain person, or a Romney person, they all interact with the internet differently, and it's a question of targeting your messages to your audience, giving them what they need, and I think that certainly I think that we are well positioned. I think there's a lot of strong support for Senator McCain out there. There's a lot of people who are McCainiacs who visit johnmccain.com religiously, and so I think there is that strong base support, similar to what you saw with the talk radio back the generation before. So I think that that's certainly out there. I don't know that we'll have the same numbers that they will, but I think that as we proved with the primary election, it's not just about numbers. It's about doing things effectively and doing things a little bit differently.
Mindy, I want to give you the chance to be unemployed between now and November and ask you if Republicans are do you think Republicans are where they need to be in terms of organizing their online efforts for the general election?
You know, I think it's short-sighted to think that the web doesn't play a role. I think it clearly does, and you just look at the money and you look at the number of friends on Facebook, and you can say the Democrats are ahead of the Republicans. I'm in the school that I think that's less of a technology and tactics issue than it is sort of the wave of the Republicans have been in power, had a president in power for 8 years, and so there's this great enthusiasm of Democrats for the last 8 years, kind of organizing and finding a way that they can try to get power back. But I mean, it does make a difference, but I don't think you can say it's directly proportional to the amount of support there is nationwide, because if you look at, say, the number of Facebook friends John McCain has versus Barack Obama, I think it's like 7 times. Obama has 7 times McCain does. But if you look at the polls right now, the national polls of where the candidates stand, Barack Obama is ahead of John McCain, but not by 7. Not by a margin that would be equal to their Facebook friend deficits, McCain's Facebook friend deficit. So it does make a difference. You also, though, if you look at the Republican side, Ron Paul was really the internet story of the Republican side. How this candidate came out of nowhere and had more friends, more web traffic, more money with the money bombs that his supporters put on for him than any other candidate, but that didn't directly translate to the polls. So I think it does need to be paid attention to, because it is an ends of a means. I mean, the means is sort of the groundswell of support for a candidate, and then that was reflected online, and that needs to be paid attention to. But I don't think it necessarily spells doomsday for Republican candidates this cycle.
All right, let's turn to the audience for a couple questions, then maybe I'll jump back in later. Do we have a microphone up front if anybody wants to ask anything of the panel? If not, I will continue. Anybody? Any questions yet? Go ahead. Come on up.
Hi, I'm Jose Antonio Vargas from The Post. So I've written a lot about a lot of these people up here. And I wanted to ask, what have you learned from each other in the past 17 months, if any? Because, I mean, what I think is exciting about this campaign is a lot of this is happening for the first time. I mean, of course, 2000, I mean, a lot of people can say that John McCain was really the first one who raised money online. And then the Dean campaign, the Bush campaign did a really good job with organizing online and offline. But this is really the first time that all of this is happening. So what have you guys learned from each other in this cycle?
Well, we're all learning together. One of the amazing facts is that we really are sort of inventing this by the seat of our pants. There is no precedent for it. Joe, obviously, Trippy was one of the pioneers. And on the Democratic side, you either worked for Dean or you worked for Kerry, and we sort of laid the foundation back then, all of us. Joe, you were with Dean, right? I mean, we've all had the same sort of experience, but it's a very small handful of people who are doing this, trying to pioneer it together. We're all on the same team. So, during the course of the campaign, obviously, I wanted my team to win, but it's extremely gratifying to see Democrats have such tremendous success online, whether it's, Senator Edwards, Senator Obama, or anybody. So, you guys are helping us too. We're all trying to figure this out. It is a very new field. If I can just get into a little bit of what it's like to run an internet department inside a campaign. First of all, you're dependent totally on the skill and the talent of the exceptional people you work with. But your job is, and of course your candidate, who is your leader and who's the person that you're out there promoting. But I joke that it's like walking a mile-high tightrope without a net. It is unbelievably complex because the internet is now the hub of a campaign. I'm sure we've all had this experience. Every department is placing demands on you. The finance team, the field team, the political team, whatever you're dealing with, the internet has a component in there. And so you need to balance that. You need to balance the needs internally and the needs externally. You need to balance what your supporters need and want in terms of tools to build communities and to engage you. So it's an incredibly difficult process. So my heart goes out to anybody who's doing it for campaigns.
Just one thing to jump on that. I think the one thing that's interesting about this field is just how Democrat Republicans tend to work together and at least celebrate each other's accomplishments, because I think across party lines we're all in this because we think that this is good for democracy. At the end of the day, I'm excited by the number of people who are coming out on both sides and who are really feeling empowered to do things, and it does add a lot of conversation out there, but I think that's ultimately.
But it's even better for democracy if Democrats win.
I'll take issue with that, but
okay.
But I think the other thing too, to piggyback off what he is saying, is that the money message all three components is that everything ties together. So if you're generating this really interesting content, that's going to make people more likely to give to you. That's going to make them more likely to get involved, and vice versa. So I think that the interesting thing that we're all observing from each other is how tightly everything fits together, and that you need to present a nice, complete package online.
I think that I can respond to that too. I think that's a good question, and for the internet team especially, I think we pay a lot of attention to what's going on in other campaigns. One, it's very transparent what they're doing because you just go online and see what kind of action they're taking when they launch something new. But two, as Peter and Mark said, we are very new to this, and so this really came on the scene eight years ago, even 4 years ago, and so I think that's important. But I will note one thing that I kind of would have known to be true, but has been proven this cycle, is that I made the point that the internet is very ground up, and it's more what the supporters are even doing out in the field. But it is very important the kind of commitment that the campaigns themselves make to the internet and the understanding of how it's going to play in their campaign. I know very early on, I don't have the exact number right, but the Obama team, when they launched their campaign last January, February, already had 10 or more. No, well, at one point.
Me and Chris Hughes and one other guy in a room. It was pretty low key back then.
Okay. But I know at some point, probably back in the spring when Jose wrote his article first on the online political operatives, that there was more staffers devoted on the web team on the Obama campaign than any other campaign out there. And as you see, that kind of success paid off. I mean, it wasn't enough just to have those 5, 6, however many it was at that point, people, but it did show that there was a great commitment by the campaign and a great importance placed on the power of the web and how it would allow their campaign to be successful. And I think that is something that I learned, and I think hopefully other people in politics have learned as well.
Joe, what influenced the strategies that you guys developed?
Well, just to follow up on that point, I think that as much as the amount of resources you put into it is important, it's also about how you organize it, interdepartmentally and structurally within the campaign. And we get to have some of the coolest jobs in politics because we get to dabble in the communication side and the field organizing side and the fundraising side with a level of depth that very few other people inside the campaign get to do. So there's that. In terms of what we've learned from the other campaigns, I mean, we actually may not be that interesting, but we're I'm on Hillary Clinton's email list in Des Moines and Ames and Dubuque, and you watch. You try to have as much a window into what kind of content the campaigns are pushing out, how they're organizing their supporters and things like that. And I think everybody
we had a Google account with every single email from every single candidate, Republican and Democrat, that we could all go look at and watch every single communication. So exactly like Joe's saying. So you do learn from one.
So Joe, you're right in the line of fire for the debt reduction emails. Next question.
Hi, I'm Paul Bledsoe with the Bipartisan Policy Center. I was particularly interested, there was an article in the Atlantic Monthly a couple months ago about the role of the internet organizing on behalf of specific legislation once a candidate becomes president. That strikes me as an entirely new way to mobilize public support. I was wondering if the McCain and Obama representatives could comment on that.
You mentioned that yourself, Joe. Do you want to talk about that?
I think that it's obviously we're focused on winning the general election now, but to go back to the point I made in the opening about these relationships that are being built between Barack Obama and his supporters and voters, but also between the supporters themselves, that's not something that's going to come to a stop on Election Day. And I think that the challenges after that are going to be big, but very interesting and potentially very powerful.
I think you are seeing people and groups, organizing online very effectively to push an issue to the forefront, like the Ed No 8 or some of those other kinds of groups out there that are really working hard to, at least put this on the agenda for the presidential campaigns.
Do you foresee emails out of the White House on behalf of legislation, as in the past we've seen fireside chats and national addresses? Because it seems to me that's where it's headed. And that could be just an amazing organizing tool on behalf of specific legislation, particularly thinking of the big ticket issues like climate change, health care. Just any comment on that would be interesting.
Well, I think that, like Joe, obviously we're focused on the election, but I think that, moving forward, I think one of the things about this panel is that it is true. This is the first one where it's so open and so transparent. I think, whoever wins, I think John McCain would be a very transparent and open president. And he's already said, he wants to go before Congress and do these kind of things. And as you've seen him, one of the keys to his primary win was he's very open. He's very accessible to the press. He's a straight talker. And I think that translates well to the online world today. And I think that's going to be important, both for our next president and presidents down the road. Is that it's just a much more open and you're out there 24/7.
I would just add, I just point out that, or remind that Trippy in his little statement, and also in the articles that we did on this in the spring, that's explicitly what he expects. And he's had a pretty good record as kind of as a prophet in this particular area, not necessarily out of the White House, but on behalf of the president, and the president working very aggressively to keep that network together and enlarge it. And it'll be interesting to see what impact that ultimately would have on Congress. Alex?
Alexis Semendinger with National Journal. I was going to ask about the governing too, but all of you are going to be old farts by 2012. Can you project forward today and look at technologies that you see coming into play 4 years from now? If Joe Trippy was talking about the Wright brothers just 4 years ago, what are we going to be looking for the candidates of 2012?
I mean, I'll make one point. I mean, I think those who follow any kind of tech blogs, or probably people who aren't even into tech, know that a new iPhone's coming out, and everyone's talking about getting the new 3G iPhone. I think the big difference in 2012 is just going to be, you're already talking about a wave of the country of less people working from offices and more people working from home and on the go. I think as Americans start to do that more, a lot of campaigning is going to be happening on the go, and there's going to be a lot more. There was already so much video up on YouTube, and they talked about that in the intro. We've seen powerful things happen through YouTube. I think many more individuals are going to be kind of giving themselves a presence online through video as the technology allows them to do so in a greater way than ever before. And I think that's going to be interesting. I know there's a Google phone coming out as well. So it'll be, I think as people have those kinds of devices, it's going to be really fascinating.
Well, I think that the development of politics online and technology in general sort of tracks. So with the expansion of the social web, which obviously Google, Facebook, Microsoft, so many others are really competing the space to expand, if you look at stuff like Open Social and other initiatives to really open up and go to what people call Web 3.0, which really has no meaning yet, or hasn't been defined. But that's probably where it will end up, where developments in technology will continue on a track, and politics will sort of pull from those developments and use them in certain ways. And then the way in which politics uses that will then affect the technology. And so you have this symbiotic relationship with technological developments and the use of it in politics.
I think that one big difference in 2012 will be not just the technology, but the human resources of volunteer organizations. And 5 months from now, we're going to have from both sides a group of Americans who have more substantive organizing experience in the civic and political process than perhaps we've ever had before. And so that those seasoned volunteers and folks who will take even more steps of leadership in campaign cycles ahead, I think that's going to both respond to whatever new technology emerges, but also demand it in order to do their jobs better as campaigns become more and more turned over to them and in their hands locally.
Yeah, and I think one other thing too is the greater convergence of TV and the internet, and pretty soon the idea of YouTube may even seem quaint in the future. That you could in 2012 be sitting on your couch and watch. Already these things are starting to happen, but just the greater convergence of the two is I think going to be really important in campaigns.
I want to come back to that, but why don't we?
I just wanted to ask, you were talking earlier about networks and using them after the election, kind of, from the White House. Do you think that would contribute to maybe a negative kind of Karl Rove perpetual campaign, and do you think it could be used as a negative thing? Or, do you think it would stick kind of along the fireside chat side?
Well, let me just say one thing, because I heard this on the previous panel. The association of the internet with negativity is sort of I'm not accusing you of doing it, obviously, but it's pretty much something that we all taught, the internet just makes everybody more angry, and just more angry people online, and more polarization. the way the traditional media would set agendas and would push information in such an insidious and subtle way that would affect the public conversation and people's views was just as negative as somebody, expressing themselves openly online. So the association of negativity with the internet, I think, is a completely false premise to begin with. And it's probably the one that's the most difficult to uproot. In this campaign, yes, there are people who said negative things online, but they said those same negative things offline as well. And reporters who were supposedly responsible sometimes said the most objectionable things, and we all knew about them towards many different candidates, not just the candidate I worked for. So the notion that the internet has made things more negative, I think if you get rid of that premise, you sort of see it as it is just a reflection of who we are, and it's a tool that we all use, and it's just integrating itself into the culture generally and into the culture of campaigns.
Can I go back though to sort of the underlying, maybe one of the thoughts in that question? It goes back to something that Joe mentioned before. Part of what we talked about the money and the organizing, but the other part is the communication and enhancing the capacity of candidates or ultimately a president to communicate directly with large numbers of people, basically mass communication without going through the mass media. When Obama did his Race in America speech in Philadelphia, you put it on the website, you email people, you ask them to sort of forward it to other people, and over 5 million people saw it under sort of your umbrella rather than through CNN or MSNBC or anything like that. As campaigns develop this capacity and ultimately office holders develop this capacity, Mindy, maybe can I start with you? How do you think this changes the dynamic? Does it make the agenda-setting function of the press less important? Is it a completely different track? Certainly the campaigns seem to be tussling pretty intently over controlling the daily news cycle, so it's not like they've abandoned that. So what does it mean when candidates can reach 5, 6, 7, 10 million people themselves without having to go to the networks to do so?
Well, first of all, I think, just to the initial question and then to your question, I think it answers both, is that I don't think that a president communicating to the masses, whether it's via an email list or whether it's a blog post here and there or videos that are online, they do this weekly radio address, if they were actually doing a video every single day or every week about some issue that they're concerned about, maybe that seems like a perpetual campaign. However, presidents are doing those activities all the time anyway, except in the past they did it to an elite group. I mean, even going back to the history of time, the history of America, it was really, an office holder speaking to an elite. It was only, not everyone could even vote. It was just, white male landowners. So they were speaking to an elite, and then there was everybody else in America. And then as it's opened up that we've all become part of our politic, we all care about politics. We all have, most of us have a vote. And so it is important that we hear from our president. They're going to speak to an elite anyway. They're going to give speeches that are on television, or the media, broadcast media is going to broadcast interviews with them or pieces of their speeches. So why not? I don't think there's any problem. In fact, I think it's a good thing if they're communicating to the masses as well. And then the masses still have the media, whether that's the mainstream media, whether that's bloggers, whether that's their friend who sends them an email or posts something on Facebook. They still have those means for looking into it further and not just buying what the president's saying, which is what we all do anyway. We don't necessarily, because the president's saying something or because the mainstream media says something, it's what we take as gospel. And I think at one time, when the press was supposed to be seen as this overarching agenda-setting medium who just gave the facts, a lot of people, maybe did take the mainstream media as gospel and said, here's what it is. But we're past a point where that's going to be the case. And whether we say, well, this is really bad and we need to make sure that we have this, I think Mark Halperin said in the last panel, this serious adult-focused, corporate-sponsored media that's telling us, what the agenda should be. It's too late for that. The internet's here to stay. We're never going to go back to that. I think there is a role for the mainstream media. I think it is important for people to have a job that says, we're nonpartisan and we're going to report these big stories and we're going to go in depth. But the world has changed, and you see that with the mainstream media too. I think Mary Catherine Ham alluded to this in the last panel. CNN now relies on, they call these, I think, contributors out in the field who are uploading photos or who are giving on-the-ground accounts for all these events, which allows them to be better reporters than they would have been if they're just relying on their newsroom staff.
So Joe or Peter, does it make this daily struggle to influence the news cycle less apocalyptic if you can also reach people directly, or what does that capacity to reach people directly? How does it change the communication strategy of the campaign?
I'm not very sanguine about the capacity, the communication side of the internet. I got to tell you that the money in the organizing this campaign is a proven factor that it can actually affect the election. But from the communications front, if you look at Jay Leno, he'll reach more people with one monologue than the entire progressive blogosphere combined on any given day, okay? So one joke about a candidate, you know, will reach more people and filter into the bloodstream more than all the progressive bloggers. And on and on and on. I mean, you know, for some unknown reason, you know, Matt Drudge continues to control newsroom agendas and editorial rooms. Who knows why, but it's some sort of mythic hold he's got on people. So you still have these players that get millions of viewers. You know, it's really, you know, you talked about it as a mass communication medium, which it is. The difference is mass communication in the 20th century was one to many, and this is now many to many. So it's a very different form, but it is a mass communication medium with user-generated content filtering upwards as opposed to, you know, one single source filtering information downward. But still, we're still living with 20th century hierarchies of influence right now. You know, a David Broder or a Tim Russert can still sort of shape the zeitgeist with one or two words that they say, whereas a Jane Hampshire, who has a tremendous blog and who's sitting right here and a true friend of mine, and says very important things and covers things in very important ways, still doesn't have that sort of traditional legitimate value given to and I'm not criticizing a Tim Russert or a David Broder, I'm just saying that the way the legitimacy structure still works, we're still living in the 20th century, not the 21st century when it comes to that.
Those two words you had in mind wouldn't be, it's over.
No, I'm talking about any issues in general, like determining the agenda. You know, when a Matt Drudge, a Jay Leno, and a Tim Russert determine the agenda more than Arianna Huffington or a Jane Hampshire or a Marcus, you know, there are still disparities in getting that message out, even though we are all trying to do that.
A quick thought, Joe, before we go to one or two last questions.
You know, I think that it doesn't make it any less important to fight those battles in the traditional ways, but it does give you a fighting chance. And the 5 million people you can communicate with to watch the video, how many of them then tell someone about it and characterize what the speech was about and things like that. So, you know, it's just another tool. But you know, obviously, you guys are still getting a lot of phone calls from the press shop.
Right. Let's do a couple quick questions. We only got a few minutes.
Hi guys, Mike Cornfield, George Washington University and 720 Strategies. My question concerns digital coattails, by which I mean, it seems to me that the next President of the United States will be helped in governing if he shares his online resources, his online lists, his online volunteers, his online network with members of Congress and candidates for Congress who are in tight elections, because then they'll owe you something when they get in. So my question is, to what extent do you think there will be sharing and collaborative, what used to be called party activity, between the presidential campaigns and tightly contested congressional races using the internet?
Mark, you want to start?
Sure. I think that's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure exactly, you know, presidential down to you know, specifically, but I think there is this growing online culture for congressional, Senate, and everywhere down to school board elections. And I think that what we're starting to see is the importance of it, you know, and so somebody may get drawn in because they saw, you know, they came to a John McCain or a Barack Obama thing and they get involved in the politics. But then they say, well, how can I get involved on a more local level? And nowadays with the internet, there's just so many ways that you can be very specifically involved in things very down to a micro level. And I think that's one of the most powerful enablers of the internet nowadays.
So would you put links to Republican candidates for school board on the John McCain website, just to give an example?
I don't know that there's going to be that level of coordination to it, but I think that, you know, kind of a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think presidential campaigns, more than congressional or Senate campaigns, kind of set the agenda or set, you know, we try out more things simply because we have more resources and we'll push the envelope a little bit more. But I think that, you know, every off-year cycle, you're still seeing progress and building up to these presidential campaigns.
Joe, any quick thought?
I think one of the points of having staff in all 50 states for the general election is to build the volunteer capacity, so folks in states where we may not be competitive can do the kinds of work that can help us in states where where there is a race, but also that volunteer capacity is built so that candidates up and down the ballot have trained and cultivated volunteers and a network of folks with relationships that, as I said before, are going to continue. So I think that you'll see a lot of entrepreneurial Senate and House and gubernatorial candidates actually proactively reaching out into the networks of supporters of McCain or Obama in order to, get their lid out on a canvas that they see is happening on mybarackobama.com, or get their face in front of the groups of volunteers.
Let's see if we can squeeze in our last two questioners before they pull the plug on us. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Erica Honoring with Appleseed. I've done a lot of organizing, and one of the things that seems like that this is going to be a turnout campaign, and just looking at how do you find out what are your turnout models in terms of each state? Because there seems so much that's not known in terms of from the volunteers and everything. But how do you define what you need to pull out for each state?
Question.
I think that one of the opportunities we all have and the general election campaigns have is to bring a whole lot of new people into the process. And I think we saw this in the primaries as well, is that one of the main functions of our shop as related to the field organizations in the early states and the later states as well was to bring in folks, get folks indicating their support or even signing up to volunteer who just weren't in the voter file or weren't even known to the field staff, and were engaging in the process for the first time, weren't registered to vote, didn't have any kind of voting history, weren't in the records at all. And so,
But how do you guarantee they're going to come out again, one? And also, if you looked at what happened in New Hampshire, it seemed like nobody knew what was going to happen, and there was not a model in terms of who was going to turn out.
Well, I think that brings up a very good point, is that, you don't necessarily know. And I think that, for me to say, if we got, 50.192, you're not going to know down to that level. But I think that's from an e-campaign perspective, what I can control is how many people can I bring in? How do I get people involved? How do I get people interested? How do I seed the conversations and get people excited about it? So the answer to your question is, I don't know. I can't guarantee you a number of people that are going to come in. But I can guarantee you that if more people are excited about our candidate and more people are raising money and knocking on doors and doing things, I have every confidence in the world that we're going to be able to turn out votes.
Just quickly poll the panel. Do you think there will be 122 million people voted in 2004? Do you think we will reach that number or exceed it in 2008 based on what we've seen in the primaries?
I would say exceed.
Exceed it.
I'll take a pass. I don't know. I hope.
I hope so too.
Okay, let's go to the last question.
I'm Dan Manat with PoliticsTV.com, and full disclosures, produce Hotline TV for Ron's colleagues, Amy Walter and John Mercurio. And Peter, I want to challenge you or drill a little further in one thing you mentioned about whether the old symmetries or asymmetries, the gatekeeping function of the Russerts and so forth versus Jane, still applies on the video front, and specifically vis-a-vis the gotchas. Because broadcast obviously can't be everywhere, and in fact, so many of the most important video moments of this cycle came from the citizen journalists. Jane got the money shot from the rules and bylaws hearing of Harriet Christian being rather irate about, I'm going to vote for McCain, I'm going to vote for McCain. Mayhill Fowler from off the bus at Huffington Post getting both the bitter comments and then more recently the Todd Purdom comments. And not only is there sort of a shift in power there, it seems to me, empowering the citizen journalist, but also the whole gatekeeper function of the traditional media to an extent is gone. Nobody knows this better than Mike Liddell in the back of the room from the DSCC, who couldn't get any broadcast station in Charlottesville or anywhere to pick up the macaca comments, so they went to YouTube as a last resort, and that's where it went viral. So I'm wondering if in the video realm, in the gotcha realm, in fact, that dynamic has been turned on its head, that certainly from an opposition research standpoint, from an opposition video standpoint, and from the gotcha video standpoint, the dynamic aptly demonstrated by Jane has been turned on its head.
It's a great question, and since we're wrapping up, I'll keep the answer very brief. Joe made a good point, sort of the coda to what I said. It still doesn't hurt to try to, bypass these structures or create new structures, and we're doing that. And the emergence of this sort of new completely new mode of conversation is changing the way, communication happens. But you sort of alluded to it right now. You said, well, we weren't able to get it picked up by a local station. It doesn't become legitimate until the news, the traditional news media plays it. So when does a macaca moment become a problem for a candidate? It's when the nightly news plays it, or the morning shows play it, or the Sunday political shows talk about it, or the cable nets start talking about it incessantly. If a video gets 1 million or 2 million views, 2 million people saw it, all right? That's the end of it. And until it gets picked up and is hammered by the cable news and picked up by the evening news, that's when candidates start getting worried. And I'm not saying it's not even a value judgment. It's just the way it is, and we have to acknowledge that. I think it's really this sort of false dichotomy, is the online community going to replace the traditional media? It doesn't really work that way. This is a symbiotic, actually I call it a parasitic relationship. It's a little uglier, which is sort of what it is. We're all feeding off one another, and it's going to stay that way. You're never going to replace good reporters. That's a skill, just the way you're not going to replace a good musician just because you can get somebody playing piano on YouTube. But what you do is very important, Dan, and I respect a lot, what you guys do, what Jane does with her video, and what everybody who does web video. I mean, our campaign tried to make very proactive use of online video, massive town halls, hillcasts, hillcams, everything possible to use web video. So, but the answer is, it's not legit until the traditional news, and maybe that will change, but I don't think so.
Our time's basically up, but I'd like to ask for a closing thought, starting with Mark and working down. When this election is over, on the day after Election Day, what will be the aspect of the internet's role in affecting this campaign that you think will be the most memorable, that people will walk away saying, yeah, this is how politics changed?
From an idealistic standpoint, I think that people will say, we have access to so much more information, we got to know our candidates so much more, and hopefully that'll have a really great discussion. I think that both our candidates are excited about having a discussion with the American people, and I think that is the good of the internet. Always has this negative connotation of the gotcha moments and things like that. I'm idealistic, and I believe that there's a lot of positive that can come from it.
Mindy?
Yeah, idealistically, hopefully they'll be writing that the power is back in the hands of the people, or more in the hands of the people. Unfortunately, I have a feeling, and I hope this isn't the case for reporters in the room, that it's just written about the money that was raised online.
Not idealistically, realistically, this will be remembered as the election where the internet enabled Democrats to restore some sanity to our government and actually take back the White House.
Yeah, I think.
I'm not a partisan. Not at all.
I think the impact will be that a whole lot of people realize that they have more control and power over the political process than they thought before this cycle, and that I think a lot of elites think they do.
All right, Mark, Mindy, Peter, Joe, and Joe, in the absent chair, thank you all, and thank you for listening.